Students, welcome back to One Stop Law. In our previous lectures, we have studied about section 13 and 14 of the Indian Contract Act, which gave us the meaning of consent and free consent, right? And in the last video, that is the lecture on section 14, I had told you about Cuffham Square, which basically summarizes the 5 factors which vitiate free consent. That is how to remember them in a very easy fashion. That is, C stands for coercion, U for undue influence, F for fraud, M for misrepresentation, and the final M for mistake. So Cuffham Square gives us the 5 factors which vitiate free consent to a contract. And from this lecture onwards, we will study those 5 factors one by one. So today's lecture is on section 15, which provides for coercion as an element which vitiates free consent to a contract. So, students, what is the meaning of coercion in general parlance? Like, what is the literal meaning of the term coercion? It means to coerce someone, that is to use force on someone. All right, that is when someone's consent to something is obtained by use of force. Like that person gives such consent not out of his own will but under some threat, pressure, or some force. Okay, that is, he gives this consent completely against his will, and he gives it only under some pressure, under some fear, and that pressure and fear is because there is some threat of force which is being given to him. So that's exactly what is provided under section 15 of the Indian Contract Act. As you can see, it says that coercion is the committing or threatening to commit. Okay. Any act forbidden by the Indian Penal Code or the unlawful detaining or threatening to detain any property to the prejudice of any person whatever with the intention of causing any person to enter into an agreement. So, as per the definition, we see that what is coercion? Coercion is use of force, or it is like either committing any offense under IPC. Okay, that is, you kidnap someone and then call for ransom. The person agrees to give you that ransom. Okay, uh, this is extortion. Basically, this is extortion under IPC. Okay, again, there is kidnap of a person. So all these things combinedly make one person give some property to someone. So this is what the method used here is: coercion, force, power. Okay, that too using all illegal things, all methods or offenses which are mentioned under IPC. So coercion involves either an offense or threat to commit an offense. So with that threat only, people subdue to what you say. So the simplest example I can give you is when say Mr. A is made to sell his house to B, say for rupees 5 lakh. Maybe the price of the house is 50 lakhs, but A is made to give his house to B for 5 lakh rupees. There is a deed. Now, by just reading the deed, we don't get to see, because the factor of coercion is not reflected in the deed itself. But again, we know that for contract consideration need not be adequate. But suppose A later on goes to the court and says that, I was made to sign this contract when I was put at gunpoint. Okay, gun was kept at my head and I was made to sign this deal that I sell my house worth 50 lakhs for 5 lakh to B. This is where A is pleading coercion. Okay, and he wants to avoid this contract. Other example can be, instead of say A being put at gunpoint, it was A's child who kind of maybe was kidnapped, or maybe the child was put at gunpoint. In that case also, if A was made to sign such a contract of selling his house to B for a much lower price, in that case also it would have been coercion. Why? As you can see in the next paragraph, there it is written that a very crucial part of coercion under Indian Contract Act, which says that to the prejudice of any person whatsoever, means coercion could be directed against the prejudice of any person and not just the party to the contract. So in the first example I gave you, when A was a party to the contract, A was made to sell his house and A was put at gunpoint. So it was directly the party to the contract was put under threat of being committing an offense, or threat or pressure. So that is clear coercion. In the second case, where A's child was put at gunpoint, or A's child was at some risk, then also it would be coercion under Indian law. Why? Because Indian law makes it very clear that this prejudice of any person, it can be any person whatsoever, and not only the party to the contract, like whose consent is so obtained, whose consent is not free. It is not necessary to put that person only at the threat of something. Okay, it is only to coerce this person, and the threat may be on someone else. Similarly, as you can see in the last line, it says even a third party to the contract can cause coercion to obtain the consent. So like I gave you the example, A was made to sell his house to B for a much lower price, and A was put at gunpoint, or say A's child was put at gunpoint. Now take another example. In the similar situation, A was actually put at gunpoint by C. Okay, the contract was between A and B. Okay, and the person who was threatening to kill A, or who was holding that gun, or who was pressurizing A to sell his house to B, was C. So here C seems to be a third party. But then also, because coercion can, the force can come from any third party, and it can also be directed to the party to a contract or any other party. So what I mean to say, if the coercion was on A's child, then also it would be a valid case of coercion. Okay, where A can go to the court and treat this contract as void, get the contract declared void by the court. At the same time, if C was the person to put A as at gunpoint and make him sign this contract, then also the contract remains voidable at the option of A. A retains the right to go to the court later on and get the contract declared void. This is all about coercion. Also, to keep in mind here that the onus of proving coercion in this case lies on the person whose consent was so obtained, or who wants the relief from the court, that who wants to relieve himself from the consequences of the contract. That is to say, the person who wants the court to get this contract declared void, okay, on the ground that his consent to the contract was not free, and that it was caused by some coercion, force, okay, use of force or threat. The burden of proving the factor of that force was used, or he was coerced, is on the same person who alleges the fact. So basically, one who alleges any fact has to prove his own fact, right, in the court. So in this case, the person who wants the court to get this contract declared void, that is, who wants to say that the contract is voidable at his option, the burden of proving the factor of coercion lies always and throughout on him. Finally, let's look into some of the decided cases on coercion. The first is a very famous case of Chika Mamiraju versus Shishamma, where it was held that threat to commit suicide does amount to coercion. In this case, what had happened, that a husband had actually given a threat to commit suicide if his wife and son did not execute certain property in the name of the husband. So the wife and the son did comply at that time, because the husband was giving a threat to commit suicide, but later on went to the court to avoid the execution. And the court did held that yes, threat to commit suicide is definitely a coercion, because it exerts a lot of pressure on the person, and under this pressure anyone would do whatever a person asks to do. Okay, so threat to commit suicide is you know very much a coercion. The next two case laws I have discussed here is an exemption to coercion, or they are not cases of coercion. The next one, you can see, the second one is of Workman of Apinti Estate versus Industrial Tribunal, 1966 case. Basically, it was a case where it was held that threat to go to strike by the workers for bonus is not coercion. See, a right to strike is kind of a legitimate right given under our labor law. This is all although treated as the last weapon, but yet this is a very powerful weapon in the hands of the workers to get their rights secured, or their rights being, their legitimate rights and demands being complied with by the employer. So bonus is their legitimate right, and if they do not get it, they have a right to go to strike. And then it cannot be said that they're basically asking for bonus by exerting coercion, and then the employer can go to the court and get the the decision of bonus, whatever they decide, as being capable of being set aside, being voidable. No, bonus is the right of the workers, and for any legitimate demand, if they go for strike, where strike is also their legal right, and a statutory right rather. Okay, so under Industrial Disputes Act. Therefore, this was not the case of coercion, and this was, you know, a valid demand by the workers. Similarly, the last case you can see, Andhra Sugars Limited versus State of AP. In this case, it was held that any statutory compulsion is no coercion. So basically, in this state, it was held that the duty to pay government taxes, okay, that, that government levy taxes on us, we cannot say that we are being coerced or forced to pay these taxes. We have to understand that the government has to run this country, and its source of income is revenue, generation of revenue. Yes, sometimes the high rates of taxes are being criticized, like nowadays we do, this high rate of taxes on the petroleum products is being criticized very severely. And yes, there may be some ground to or valid reason to it, but anyway, just, that the government is collecting taxes from us. If we do not pay taxes, we have penalties and fines and punishments waiting for us. In fear of that we are paying our taxes, and that is being, actually coerced from us. We pay it under coercion. This is not right, because tax is the source of revenue for the government to earn, and every tax has a statutory um, sanction to it. Okay, so any statutory duty which we are bound to do, we cannot say that we are being coerced to do it. Okay, that's all for coercion as an element to vitiate uh, free consent to contract. And as we all know, the effect of coercion is that the contract is becomes voidable, and the party whose consent was not free to it can go to the court and get the contract declared void. That's all, students. See you in the next lecture. Thank you.